Laura Lee here, back with medical herbalist Johnathan Treasure. So you can actually go to your lawn if it's not sprayed on and pick those dandelion leaves, put them in a salad.
Well, yes, you do have to be careful about Roundup. Yeah.
What about the heads of the dandelions? Are those useful to throw them in a teapot or what?
The flowers, I haven't actually eaten dandelion flowers. I've eaten a lot of flowers. Herbalists tend to eat flowers, but they're not used medicinally. It's the root and the leaf that are used.
Oh, the root and the leaf. Okay.
Yeah,
those are pretty big leaves. I pulled up a dandelion or two.
The roots are huge, yeah. Very difficult to get out. But,
one
could...
cure you and you're trying to wipe me out.
Quite so, yes.
Well, that's interesting because the insects and the plants and the deer and the plants all have this very interesting relationship. It's kind of an escalation of war in a sense. They've found that when a deer starts nibbling on a tree, that tree will put more tannins, which is a toxin to the deer, in its leaves. Within a few short minutes, it will signal other trees of the same species in the area, hey, intruder alert.
Mm-hmm.
And so in fact, giraffes with acacia trees in Africa can only feed for a short period of time because if they feed for more than 20 minutes, too much tannin goes in the acacia leaves and they'll get sick and die. So they have to feed in short spurts. So we have the same relationship, only the plants are trying to help us.
You're right, and actually botany today, the molecular biology of plant communication, plant immunology, at a cellular level, signal transduction between plant cells and plant rootlets and the organisms in the soil and so on, is one of the most fascinating areas of research. Currently.
I just met Francie Prowse, who worked with Cleve Baxter to put his story in book form of 30 years of putting polygraph apparatus on the leaves of plants, on human cells, on bacteria in, say, yogurt, and finding that they respond to us, they can tune to us, and this effect can happen miles away at a distance. So there's something he calls it primal perception, something very profound happening here.
Absolutely, and once again, of course, these things are generally ridiculed by the scientific community, which is
the scientific proof.
Exactly, and this is one of the tragedies of the sort of polarization that we look at. I mean, Prince Charles claims to be a tree hugger, and when people want to attack what Prince Charles says about complementary alternative medicine, they will dismiss him as a tree hugger. Whereas personally, some of my best friends are tree huggers, and there's a lot to be said for hugging a tree.
So the myth that some herbs are weak, or that a herb couldn't possibly have the strength to do something like battle cancer, is another myth that seems to me out there.
Yeah,
you have to potentize and concentrate, and all of this to get any effect goes the mainstream thinking.
Right, and most interestingly, when you actually look at the history of pharmacology, which is tied up with the origins of homeopathy and so on, it is known, and it's been known for a long time, that many medicines have what's called a biphasic effect.
Really?
And if you like, this is thought to be the basis of homeopathy, where very, very small doses of something, infinitely dilute, can actually act as in the same way as extremely strong doses.
Why would that be?
There are a lot of different explanations, but it is empirically this has been observed for an awful lot of medicines. And most recently, and very interestingly, low-dose chemotherapy using some plant chemotherapeutic agents like vincristine from the vinca alkaloids from the Madagascar periwinkle, it's been found that very low doses of chemotherapy agents can actually exert a healing effect against a cancer. And this was originally discovered, and these are doses that have no cytotoxic effect at all. This was originally discovered, the rather awful term called salvage therapy, where a stage 4 cancer patient has failed repeated rounds of chemotherapy and is too weak to withstand any more, at which point all bets are off, kind of thing, and in terms of standard practice oncology, pretty much anything goes. So you get a situation. We had a situation where someone said, well, let's try this very low dose. This happens for cyclophosphamide and for vincristine, two powerful agents, and this started working.
Wow.
Of course, the immediate reaction of the oncologist was to re-up the dose because it was working. So the suggestion is it's working by other mechanisms. So your question, how do low doses work? Probably by a lot of different mechanisms.
What would you guess that? A vibrational medicine?
For homeopathics, definitely. I think the research that's been done in the last decade or so on vibrational imprints into water water bonding structures and so on is a significant part of how homeopathy operates.
Just for anyone not familiar with homeopathy, just want to point out it's the repeated dilution of a substance to the point where no molecule remains, yet the imprint...
It can be no molecule, yeah. There's a magic number called Avogadro's number, famous chemist. Oh dear, what is Avogadro's number? I can't remember. Something like 10 to the minus 23, 6-ish times 10 to the minus 23.
It's like a quantum level. It makes
it's a huge... if you dilute below that number, it's impossible for there to be a single molecule of the original substance in the preparation. And of course, from a homeopathic point of view, the more dilute, the more potent the actual remedy.
Isn't that fascinating?
It certainly is.
And there's so much empirical evidence that homeopathy works. The other nice thing is that if you take the wrong remedy, it's not going to have an ill side effect. It just won't have any effect.
I'm not entirely convinced about that.
Really? Tell us about that. That's the party line I've always heard.
Well, it does relate to, and I should say that I am not a trained homeopath, but there is a great deal of crossover, particularly historically, between herbalism and homeopathy. Most of the original homeopathic remedies were plant remedies, with a few mineral remedies and animal remedies mixed in, which have now been dropped. They're in natural medicine, but they're not part of general herbal medicine. So there's an overlap. That's the first point. The fact, as I see it, if you are working at a constitutional level with potent homeopathic remedies, it is always possible that a successful treatment is what a homeopath loves to see, which is a direct hit. There's a complete match between the symptom and the remedy, and all the issues resolve. These are rare.
Oh, okay.
Probably rarer than most homeopaths would like to claim. However, the fact is that if you're working at a constitutional level, you can also get a near miss, which means that which isn't a problem for a good homeopath, but it does mean that you've maybe resolved some of the symptoms, but transform some of the others.
I pushed them into some other expression.
Exactly. And, of course, skilled homeopaths can actually look at the reaction to a remedy and figure out a sequence of remedies. But, to take one constant... I personally think there's a lot of people walking around kind of half-baked, as it were, by having taken, ineffective... doses of strong homeopathic remedies. So it's not as benign. It's not as benign as you might think.
My earliest experience with homeopathics was to cure a dog. A friend of mine administered some homeopathic remedies to a dog that was wounded in pain, and had next day back to normal.
Great.
The wound dried up, healed. Not healed, but dried up and not festering and infected. And I thought, wow, this is not the placebo effect by any means.
Absolutely. But I should emphasize, of course, that to say that they're having these rather subtle effects is nothing. These are not toxic. These are not toxic effects at all. Homeopathy is non-toxic, which I think was partly your point. But
right, you're not going to do
at a gross level, you're not going to cause a physical
crisis
problem. Most
like
likely.
The Tylenol in the liver.
Like the Tylenol in the liver.
What are some of the other myths that you are wont to dispel? And tell us about the book that you're putting together with a couple of colleagues and what your mission with that is.
The book. Let's deal with the book first. Briefly, it's a textbook level. Professional level, I guess, book about the interactions between drugs and nutrients, and drugs and herbs, but it's written from an integrative perspective, and I think that's another great example of the misinformation, the lack of an integrative perspective in the discussions about herb-drug interactions. So, for example, St. John's wort, going back to our favourite wort here, St. John's wort is definitely a strong interactor. It can interact with a number of pharmaceutical drugs.
Or sunlight as well.
Or sunlight, indeed. And in fact, it has anti-cancer uses based on that property. However, just looking at the interactions issue, what you see is because we know that there are interactions with certain important drugs like cyclosporin, which is used for immunosuppression in transplants. A transplant patient must have regular levels of cyclosporin. Now, if you add St. John's wort to cyclosporin, that level will go down. Okay.
The level of
cyclosporin
that
will
you
go
need.
down. Yeah.
So St. John's wort would be useful in that application then.
I can see that. You see, there you are. You're thinking from an integrative perspective. From the point of view of medicine, this makes it the axis of evil, because it's reducing the level of cyclosporin, which must be at a certain level in order to achieve, to maintain a situation in which the graft or the transplant is not rejected. Okay, but we look at this and say St. John's wort actually can lower the level of a lot of drugs. Why is this? And the molecular biology, we start to look at it in detail, and in actual fact, you could turn this whole story around and say, well, actually St. John's wort is triggering or activating an exquisitely evolved adaptive system that we as humans have evolved over millennia to protect ourselves against noxious poison chemicals, which of course includes pharmaceutical drugs. And if you look at the general effects of St. John's wort on drug metabolism, and make no mistake, it affects literally hundreds of pharmaceutical drugs. Generally speaking, it's if you don't know what you're doing, it's a bad idea to co-administer St. John's wort with pharmaceuticals. But from an integrative perspective, we can turn that around, and exactly as you were saying, we can use St. John's wort to lower drug levels, we can use St. John's wort to detoxify from excessive pharmaceutical exposures. In other words, let's get both ends of the story. Let's get both sides of the coin. If you shout heads all day long, you're going to be wrong 50% of the time. And unfortunately, that's what happens. We get one side of the story. St. John's wort is an evil interactor. The Darth Vader of herbs, and of course Darth Vader was actually a transformed good guy. So
in the end,
what
it's interesting. It has such a profound effect at such a deep level too.
This, in actual fact, St. John's wort is utterly fascinating in this respect. And this is relatively recent research that has partly come out of, interestingly, partly come out of genomics studies looking at receptors